When I came back to Dong Bin after the flood, I carried a contract worth 12 billion dong in my bag. I thought it would save my village. I thought it would give the women who spent their lives over clay jars, salt, and fish a chance to finally be seen. But when I walked into the meeting hall, the banner was already hanging. The contract was there. The buyers were there. The whole village was there. Only one thing was missing: my name. It had been crossed out, and in its place stood the people who had never stayed up through the night testing a batch, never borrowed money for labels, never carried jars through the rain, never risked anything except other people's labor. That morning, I learned something cruel. A flood does not only come from the river. Sometimes it rises quietly inside people's hearts, and by the time you notice it, it has already reached your chest. The contract that bore my name. Chapter 1. The order after the flood. I returned to Dong Bin on the very morning the floodwater withdrew from the communal yard. Mud still clung to the wooden pillars. The smell of rotting straw and fresh silt mixed together, familiar and strange at once, like a relative I had not seen in years who still owed me an explanation. In my shoulder bag lay a memorandum of understanding with An Mok Company, a clean food retail chain in the city. They wanted to buy 30,000 jars of clay-fermented field fish sauce over the next year, with an additional line of steamed fish paste in sealed containers if the first batch passed inspection. The total value of the order was 12 billion dong. For Dong Bin, it was not only money, it was a concrete road for the outer hamlet, a drying machine for the fish sauce workshop, and school fees for children who missed classes every season to help their mothers dry fish. I was not a wealthy person arriving to hand out opportunity. I was simply Nguyen Thanh, 28 years old, formerly a purchasing officer at a food export company, then a daughter who resigned after her father died. 3 years earlier, I had left the village under the mocking laughter of several relatives. They said an educated daughter only learned to argue. They said I would work in the city for a few days and then come home to marry. But those years taught me what a proper contract needed, what paperwork a rural product required before it could stand on a major shelf, and where poor communities usually broke. No one wanted to sign their own name and be responsible. I stood before the cultural house, holding my file away from the rain, and watched the women of the fish sauce group arrive. Mrs. Sao No came with her cane, her hair white but her voice still clear. Hyung carried her little child asleep against her shoulder. Auntie Mon, Auntie Bei, Auntie Lai, and the others had stayed up many nights with me testing a formula that was less salty and less sharp in smell. They looked at me with hope and fear mixed together. A large order could save people. It could also swallow them if it fell into greedy hands. Uncle Tu Lei, the temporary head of the village cooperative committee, arrived last. He wore a white shirt, a gold-plated watch at his wrist, and a broad smile, as if he had always belonged at the center of important things. Beside him walked Lei Quen, my cousin, a young woman who always knew how to appear when a camera or a district official was nearby. Quen held a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums, placed it in my hands, and whispered, "Sister Van, you are impressive, but speak briefly later, all right? Let Uncle Tu present it properly." I looked at the flowers and gave a thin smile. I prepared the file. I will explain the buyer's conditions myself. Quen's smile froze for a beat, then returned quickly. In front of everyone, Uncle Tu patted my shoulder. The village recognizes young people who contribute, but a contract is not one person's private matter. Dong Bin must stand forward. That is how we gain credibility. I had known that sentence would come. For 3 months, I had heard it in many forms. When I sent samples for testing, they said it was for the village's honor. When I advanced money for new clay jars, they said profits could be counted later. When I asked each household to sign a pledge not to mix in cheap additives, they said I was being difficult. Then, when An Mok agreed to come to the village and sign the memorandum, Uncle Tu began calling me every night, advising me to transfer the contract representation to the cooperative committee for easier management. I entered the hall. A welcome banner for the An Mok delegation was already hanging above the platform. My name was not on it. The largest line read, "Dong Bing Cooperative signs 12 billion dong order for traditional fish sauce." Below it, in smaller letters, was the name Lei Van Lei as representative. I stopped. The voices behind me slowed, like an old fan losing power. Mrs. Sao No looked at me, blinking again and again. "Van, child, they only hung it this morning. I did not know." I said nothing. I opened my bag and took out the agreement marked by the buyer's lawyer. Clause 5 was on the third page, printed in bold. The initial technical representative and process manager was Nguyen Thanh. Any change of representative required written consent from the buyer. At least 40% of profit from the order had to be allocated to the direct producer households listed in the appendix. That clause was not meant to raise me above anyone else. It was meant to protect the women behind the smell of fish sauce, the ones always called support labor, while carrying the village on their backs. At exactly 9, An Mok's car stopped at the gate. 3 people stepped out: Mr. Phan Trong, purchasing director, Miss Ha, legal officer, and a young quality control engineer. Uncle Tu hurried out to greet them, shook their hands warmly, and invited them to the main table. I sat in the second row, listening to my heart beat slowly but heavily. After the introductions, Miss Ha opened the file that the village had sent earlier. She lifted her head, her voice calm. In this new draft, the signing representative is Mr. Lê Van Lê. Then where is Miss Nguyen Thanh sitting? The hall went silent. Uncle Tu smiled. Van was the initial connector, but in terms of legal status and local credibility, we agreed that I would represent the village. Miss Ha turned another page. Who agreed? No one answered at once. I stood up. I have never signed any transfer document. The 32 households in the appendix have never met to vote, either. Uncle Tu's face darkened. Lê Quen looked at me as if I were a stain on a new shirt. The villagers began to whisper. I clearly heard someone say, if the order comes to the village, it belongs to the village. Why is she holding on to her name? Another replied, maybe she is afraid of losing her share. I looked out the window. Outside, floodwaters still lay in the grass. In that moment, I understood. The real flood was not in the river. It was in people's hearts. It rose slowly, and by the time one noticed it, it had reached the chest. Chapter 2. The name crossed out of the minutes. The meeting was suspended for 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes felt longer than the 3 months I had spent running papers and samples. Uncle Tu pulled me into the rear corridor, where the wall was still stained with water. Lê Quen followed, holding her phone as if ready to record any sentence of mine that could later be cut and rearranged. Van, Uncle Tu lowered his voice, do not make the village lose face. They have already come this all way. Just sign to confirm that you agree for me to represent the project. I will not let you be disadvantaged later. How much is not disadvantaged? I asked. He paused, then laughed. You are still childish. When it is common work, counting money first damages affection. I looked at the hand he had placed on my shoulder. That same hand had held a microphone at my father's funeral and promised that the village would not leave my mother and me alone. After the funeral, he sent someone to ask about buying our strip of land near the fish wharf at half the market price. My mother refused. From then on, he visited us less. I am not counting money first, I said. I only want the commitments kept. Those who directly produce receive the direct share. The person responsible for technical standards must have the authority to stop an unqualified batch. If you sign and still keep those terms, I will not object. Lê Quen gave a small laugh. You sound very noble, but everyone knows the customer came through you. If your name remains in the contract, what if you split away later? The whole village loses everything. I turned to her. The customer chose the process, not my relatives. Quen's face flushed. Uncle Tu cut in. Enough. There are only 2 choices now. First, you sign, and everyone is pleased. Second, you remain stubborn. The order fails, and people will remember that you ruined it. I did not answer. From the hall came the sound of chairs being moved. Ms. Ha was speaking with Mr. Phan. I knew the buyer was not in a hurry. Dong Bing was, and the people in the greatest hurry were the ones who printed their names on the banner. When we returned, an emergency meeting record had already been placed on the table. The first line read, all producer households unanimously agree to assign Mr. Lê Van Lê as signing representative, while Ms. Nguyen Thanh serves as voluntary technical support. I looked at the word voluntary and almost laughed. All the nights I had slept on buses to deliver samples to the testing laboratory, all the money borrowed from friends for lids, traceability labels, and microbiological reports, everything had been folded into 2 feather-light words. Uncle Tu handed me a pen. Sign, child. I held the pen. At the last row, Mrs. Sao No gripped her checkered scarf. Hung lowered her head. Several younger villagers watched me with searching eyes. In a small village, the most frightening thing is not being disliked. It's being turned into the guilty person in a story someone else tells. I placed the pen back on the table. I need to read the entire record again.
The Queen sighed loudly. Sister Van, the guests are waiting. You are acting as though everyone wants to harm you. Anyone who does not want to harm me will not be afraid of me reading it. The murmurs rose again. I read line by line. In the appendix, the original list of 32 households had been replaced by a list of 20 qualified households, including 5 families who had never fermented fish sauce but were related to Uncle Tu. Mrs. Sao's name had been crossed out because she was elderly. Hyung's name had been removed because she did not yet have a household business certificate. My name had been moved to the bottom, marked as consultant without profit participation. I looked up. Who changed the list? Uncle Tu slapped his palm on the table, not hard, but enough to startle people. The list must follow cooperative management. We cannot allow everyone to push in. Households without full papers will be considered later. Mrs. Sao stood, her voice trembling but clear. The sample jar came from my house. Van used my mother's formula and adjusted it. Why am I not qualified? Uncle Tu's face hardened. You are old. Do you still have strength for large volume production? Mrs. Sao fell silent. Her whole life she had been used to having her work taken, then asked what strength she had left. Something cracked inside my chest. It was not loud, but it was final. Miss Hay spoke. I need confirmation. Did the original appendix households agree to this change? No one answered. The people who had been whispering suddenly became busy looking at the tile floor. Mr. Fan Trong closed the file. Anmok cannot sign while representation rights and the producer group are unresolved. We give Dong Bin 3 days to submit a valid file. If the dispute remains after 3 days, the memorandum will expire. Uncle Tu froze. 3 days? A project this large, and you speak of canceling it so easily? Mr. Fan looked at him, still polite. Because it is a large project, we cannot sign with an organization that does not know who is responsible. The meeting ended in the scrape and clash of chairs. The villagers did not blame Uncle Tu for changing the list. They turned to blame me for upsetting the customer. When I stepped into the yard, someone said behind me, she studied a little and now she thinks she is clever. If she cannot have her name on it, she destroys it. I turned. The man who had spoken was Uncle Ba Kun, my neighbor. I looked directly at him. If you think I destroyed it, then sign to produce under the new list. But when the goods are returned and penalties arrive, remember to ask the person who crossed out your name. He looked away. I walked through the mud in front of the communal house. Soil clung heavily to my shoes, but my heart suddenly felt lighter. Some doors close, not to trap us, but to stop us from trying to save people who have locked themselves in from the inside. Chapter 3. The Unusual Clause. That afternoon, I went back to my mother's house. It stood beside the old fish wharf, its metal roof still patched with scars from last year's hail. My mother was sitting over a basin, sorting lin fish. When she saw me, she washed her hands, but did not ask questions immediately. She had a gentle way of being silent, as if she were giving another person time to set down their pain before touching it. I showed her the altered meeting minutes. She read slowly, lips pressed together. When she reached the line, consultant without profit participation, she let out a dry laugh. They are exactly like they were when your father was alive. My father had been the first person to propose a clean fish sauce group. He believed the village could live from its old craft if it gave up careless habits. That year, he discovered several households adding artificial coloring so their product would sell faster. He reported it to the commune and was scolded by the whole village for damaging their livelihood. Then, on a rainy night, our storage shed of clay jars was smashed. My father did not sue. He only told me, when people are too poor, they become afraid of losing their portion. But poverty is not a license to lose one's dignity. I remembered that sentence when I asked Ann Mok to add a clause protecting the list of direct households. Miss Ha had first asked whether I was sure, because a profit allocation clause would make the contract more complicated. I told her that without it, the order would become a beautiful coat draped over a few backs, while the people who stitched the coat still shivered. My mother put the papers down. What will you do? I will wait 3 days. If they correct the file, I continue. If not, I withdraw. If you withdraw, they will dislike you. They have disliked me since morning. She looked at me for a long time. Being disliked is different from being cornered. Be careful. I understood. Dong Bin was not only a few greedy people, it was a network of debt, kinship, fear, and the habit of silence. Uncle Tu Lei held influence for years, not because everyone trusted him, but because everyone hesitated to oppose him. If a household borrowed money for a boat, he made the introduction.
If a young person wanted a job at the industrial zone, he signed the confirmation. If someone wanted a stall in front of the market, he gave the space. A person like that did not need to strike anyone. He only had to smile and remove one chair. That evening, my phone vibrated without pause. Auntie Man texted, "Don't be angry, child. We did not know the list was changed." Hung called, then hung up. An unknown number sent, "Do not think education lets you do anything you want." I read, deleted, then opened my laptop and checked the entire file again. The contract with An Mok had not yet been officially signed, but the sample documents, test results, label design, and process journals all named me as the person responsible for preparing the file. If Dong Bin submitted another file, they would have to explain the source of the samples and the right to use the process.
At around 9, Lei Quinn called. Her voice was sweet like sugar water left too long. "Sister Vaughn, I think you are misunderstanding. Uncle Tu only wants what is good for the village. Why don't you come to the cultural house so we can talk privately?" "It is late. Say what you need to say by phone." "Contract matters are not convenient on the phone. People from the commune are here too." I looked at my mother. She shook her head. I put the phone on speaker. "Quinn, if people from the commune are there, it is even better to speak openly. What do you need?" The other end was silent for several seconds. Then Uncle Tu's voice came through, no longer soft. "Vaughn, I will say this one last time. You sign the transfer minutes, and I will let you receive 300 million dong as a connection fee. That is not a small sum. Take it and do something else. Do not drag the women in this village into resistance." 300 million. My throat burned suddenly. They believed everything had a price, even fairness. And if I do not sign, then the contract is cancelled. Everyone will know it was because of you. Your mother still sells fish sauce at the district market, doesn't she? I wouldn't want this matter to affect her. My mother set her small knife down into the basin. The metal touched the aluminum softly, but a chill ran up my spine. I turned off the speaker and spoke slowly. "Uncle Tu, I'm recording this call." He fell silent. I was not recording, but that silence told me he knew he had just crossed a line. I continued. "In the next 3 days, you can submit the file correctly. If not, I will send all documents to An Mok and the District Economic Office. Do not call my mother again." I ended the call. My mother sat still for a moment, then asked, "Were you really recording?" "No." She sighed. "Next time, remember to actually record." I laughed. It was my first laugh of the day. But when night came, I could not sleep. Outside, the river, the retreating water left behind frog calls and the smell of new mud. I opened the contract and read Clause 5 again. To many people, it was an unusual clause. To me, it was a stake driven into fast water. If I let go, everything would drift away. If I held on, my hands might bleed. Chapter 4. The Meeting in the Communal Yard. On the second day, Uncle Tu organized a meeting for the whole hamlet. This time, it was not inside the hall, but in the communal yard where everyone on the way to market could see. He wanted to turn the contract dispute into a public trial, and I was the person placed on the wooden chair at the center. I arrived 10 minutes early. My mother wanted to come with me, but I refused. Mrs. Sao Na was already sitting under the star apple tree, holding an old notebook wrapped in nylon. Hyung stood beside her, dark circles under her eyes. A few women from the fish sauce group were also present, but they spread themselves apart, as if standing too close to me would mark them. Uncle Tu opened in a grieving voice. He said Dong Bin had just suffered a difficult flood season, and the whole village needed unity. He said a major order could not be left unfinished because of one person's ego. He did not care about fame, he only feared an inexperienced young person would damage the reputation of the homeland. After every sentence, several people nodded. Lei Quinn stood beside him and distributed copies of the altered minutes, where the damaging parts were presented as a professionalization plan. When my turn came, he handed me the microphone without looking at me. "Vaughn, explain. Why will you not accept the cooperative signing under its name?" I held the microphone. "I accept the cooperative signing if the cooperative is established properly, the producer's list is accurate, the direct household's rights are protected, and the technical process is not changed just to chase quantity." A man interrupted. "Saying that means you do not trust the village." "I do not trust papers that were changed behind the backs of the people who made the samples." The yard grew louder. Uncle Tu raised his hand to ask for order, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. He wanted them loud. In noise, my reasoning would sound like a mosquito. Suddenly, Mrs. Sao Na stood. She opened the nylon-wrapped notebook. "I kept a journal for every test batch. Which day Vaughn came, how many samples she took, who worked, who dried fish, who washed jars, all of it has signatures."
I was surprised. I knew she was careful, but not that she had kept everything so fully. She stepped forward and handed the notebook to the commune officer in the first row. I am old, but I am not confused. They crossed out my name because I refused to sell my clay jars to Uncle Tu's family. Uncle Tu's face fell. Mrs. Sao, if you say that, you must have evidence. She answered at once. The evidence is in the notebook. Do you have evidence that I agreed to withdraw my name? A small laugh broke out at the back of the yard, then died away. For the first time that morning, Uncle Tu could not find a smooth sentence. Lei Quinn stepped forward. Mrs. Sao is elderly and emotional. Please do not let yourselves be stirred up. I prepared a profit spreadsheet. If the cooperative manages everything centrally, each household will have more stable income.
I looked at the spreadsheet on her phone screen. The numbers were beautiful. Too beautiful. Raw material costs had been set unrealistically low. Labor was almost invisible, and the management fund took 25%. I asked, who holds the management fund? Quan replied, the executive board. Who is on the board? Uncle Tu, me, Kwong in charge of storage, and Uncle Nam for transport. Among those four, who directly ferments fish sauce? She was silent. I turned to the villagers. According to Quen's table, the people who ferment fish sauce are paid like temporary laborers. The people who do not ferment it hold the fund, sign the contract, buy materials, and decide the price. So does this order save the village, or does it save the executive board? The atmosphere shifted. It did not become support for me, not immediately, but a crack had appeared. Those who had been silent began to study the spreadsheet more closely. Uncle Ba Kuong frowned. Auntie Man pulled Huong nearer. Uncle Tu suddenly laughed loudly. Van speaks very well, but a contract is business, not a morality class. If you are so capable, do it yourself. Do not drag the whole village along with your personal demands. The sentence landed in the yard like a stone. I looked at him. Do it yourself. Perhaps he thought it was a taunt, because no one believed I could produce large quantities without the name Dongbing. But in that moment, I saw another road appear. Narrower, thornier, but not a dead end. I put down the microphone. Fine. If the file is still altered after tomorrow, I will withdraw my process from Dongbing Cooperative. Any households named in the original appendix who want to continue under the agreed commitments may contact me. Anyone who wants to follow Uncle Tu's plan, I will not stop you. Lei Quen flared up. Are you trying to divide the village? No, I am returning the right to choose to each person. I left the communal yard amid the talking. Mrs. Sao No followed with her cane. Huang came too. Then Auntie Bai, Auntie Man, Auntie Lai. Not many, only 6 people in a yard full of suspicious eyes. But when we stepped through the gate, I heard Mrs. Sao No whisper, in the olden days, my mother also began with 1 clay jar. I turned back to look at her. Mud still clung to her sandals, her shirt was faded, her back was bent from a lifetime over fish jars, but her eyes were bright. I understood then that I had lost an imaginary village and found a real team. Chapter 5. I left the village. On the 3rd day, Anmok received 2 sets of documents. One came from Dongbing Cooperative, signed by Uncle Tu, stating that I had voluntarily withdrawn from the project. The other came from me. It included the complete process journals, the original commitments of the 32 households, notes on the altered list, and a notice temporarily forbidding Dongbing from using my name in any document without written consent. Ms. Ha called me at 10 in the morning. Vaughn, we cannot sign with Dongbing under these conditions, but Anmok remains interested in the product. If you can establish a legally sufficient producer group, keep the sample quality, and prove delivery capacity, we will consider a new contract. How long do I have? 45 days for a trial batch of 5,000 jars. If it fails, we stop. If it passes, we sign the yearly contract. I looked out into the yard. My mother was drying fish on a bamboo rack, the wind filling her shirt like an old sail. I accept. When the news spread that Anmok would not sign with Dongbing, my phone became a market. Some cursed, some scolded, some advised me to be sensible and apologize. Uncle Tu did not call. He let others call. Some said I had ruined the whole village's opportunity. Some said I had taken the customer for myself. Some warned that if my mother still sold at the district market, things might be difficult. That evening, my mother packed several sets of my clothes herself. Go to the town and stay at Auntie Mai's place for now. Your father's old workshop over there can still be used. People here are angry. I cannot feel at ease while you remain here. If I leave, you will be alone. I am old, not weak. Besides, if you stay, they strike at you. If you leave, they can only talk.
I wanted to argue, but my mother had decided. Auntie Mai was my father's friend. She once had a dried fish warehouse in Ton Lac town. The warehouse had been empty since the pandemic, its roof leaking, floor cracked, but it had 3-phase power and 12 kilometers from Dongging. 12 kilometers was close enough to transport materials and far enough to reduce watching eyes. I left home at 5 in the evening. Mrs. Sao No was already sitting on Ming's 3-wheeled motor cart. Ming was my childhood friend, now repairing machines near the market. Mrs. Sao held 2 small starter jars. Hering brought her daughter and a sack of jar lids. Auntie Man brought an electronic scale. Auntie Bei carried the debt notebook of households that had contributed raw materials. Looking at the cluttered pile, I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Ming's helmet sat crooked on his head. He looked at me in the mirror. Starting a fish sauce revolution? Just doing business properly, I said. Around here, those two are almost the same thing. The cart passed through the village gate. A few people stood watching. Lei Quen appeared in front of the grocery shop, arms crossed, lips curved. I knew she was thinking I would return soon, because no one beat a village with a few clay jars and 6 women. She might have been right. I was afraid too. But this fear was different from the fear in the communal yard. It did not make me lower my head. It made me alert. The Tan Lac warehouse welcomed us with the smell of damp mold and bat droppings. The metal roof had 3 holes. Dust covered the old wooden racks inside. Huang set her daughter down on a plastic chair, looked around, and asked, "So this is the workshop, sister?" At the moment, it is a warehouse. In 45 days, it must become a workshop. Mrs. Sao tapped the floor with her cane. "The floor is high, and the air moves. It can be repaired." Ming whistled. "Repaired with faith?" I opened my bag and took out the finance notebook. "I have 160 million left. I can borrow another 200. An Mok will advance packaging costs if the trial batch passes the midterm inspection. We need a roof, a washing area, a fermentation area, a filling area, traceability labels, and a small business or group registration. One thing at a time." Everyone went quiet. Then Huang asked, "What if we fail?" I did not want to lie. "Then I carry the debt. Everyone loses labor, but I will sign it clearly. Whoever works on a day receives wages for that day, whether the trial batch passes or not. Later, profit will be divided by contribution and labor. No one works for free for my dream." Mrs. Sao looked at me for a long time. "Then it is no longer only your dream, it is ours." The first night in the warehouse, we had no beds. People spread tarps and lay down while rain dropped through holes in the roof into plastic basins. I sat by the door, opened my laptop, and typed a planned business name, Retreating Rain Clean Fish Sauce. Then I deleted it. The name sounded too sad. In the end, I wrote An Van Field Fish Sauce Production Group. An meant safety, Van meant cloud, and was also my name, but not only mine. Clouds carry water wherever they pass, but they do not keep the water for themselves. Outside, the town lights came on. Across the river, Dongbing was probably telling a story in which I had abandoned the village out of greed. I closed the laptop, looked at the 6 people sleeping in the leaking workshop, and made myself a promise. If the story had to be told again, I would tell it through qualified jars of fish sauce, transparent payrolls, and contracts where no one's name could be crossed out. Chapter 6. Those Who Remained. The next morning, work began by catching rainwater. It was not the beautiful image of a startup film. We held buckets, brooms, and rags, chased away bat droppings, scraped moss from the floor, and pulled down broken sheets of metal roofing. Min called 2 more workers, but when one heard the name Dong Bin and the contract dispute, he shook his head and left. "I am not getting involved with Uncle Tu," he said. Min watched him go and muttered under his breath, "His shadow reaches here too?" "The shadow of greed is very long," Mrs. Sao answered calmly. It took us 3 days to turn the warehouse into a place that could breathe. Min repaired the roof and let us owe his wages. Auntie Mai lent us an old dryer. I went to the district to submit the business registration, only to be asked for an additional location confirmation. The officer looked at me and asked quietly, "Is this the Dong Bin matter?" I nodded. She sighed, stamped the receipt, and said, "If you do it correctly, keep doing it, but your paperwork must be tight." Your paperwork must be tight. I repeated that sentence like a spell. Every expense was written on a public board on the wall. Whoever worked how many hours, in which stage, signed for wages at the end of the day. Mrs. Sao handled starter batches and smell checks. Huang handled jar washing and label placement. Auntie Man weighed fish and salt. Auntie Bei contacted fishing households that did not use preservatives. I handled documents, testing, negotiation, and whenever we lacked hands, I rolled up my sleeves for any task. The seventh person arrived on the afternoon of the fifth day. It was Nhu, Uncle Ba Kwong's daughter, a student who had left school halfway because her mother was ill. Nhu stood before the workshop door, gripping the strap of her faded backpack. "Sister Van, I want to work. My father does not know." I remembered that Uncle Ba was the man who had insulted me in the communal yard. "Are you sure?" Nhu lowered her head. "My father follows Uncle Tu because he owes money for the boat, but our family was crossed out of the list too. He is angry, but he does not dare speak. If I work, just pay me normally." I brought her into the workshop. No one asked more. Mrs. Sao just handed her a pair of gloves. "Wash your hands 3 times. Clean fish sauce begins with clean hands." One by one, the people who had remained with the craft, but no longer had a place on Uncle Tu's list, found their way to us. Some came at night. Some asked Min to bring fish by a side road. Some sent raw materials, but did not dare sign their names. I did not force them. Fear is also a form of poverty. To help poor people stop fearing, one cannot scold them for being timid. One must show that there is a way to live when they tell the truth. Meanwhile, Dong Bin became restless. I heard that Uncle Tu was still trying to gather goods to offer another customer. Lei Queen posted photos online, writing that the cooperative was raising the value of our hometown specialty and not allowing one individual to manipulate the community. In the photos, she stood beside rows of brand new jars, but Mrs. Sao looked at them and laughed. "Those jars have not been soaked in lime water. Ferment in them and the batch will fail." On the 10th day, a stranger came to the workshop claiming to be a salt supplier. He offered a price 30% below the market. Auntie Man was pleased, but I asked for test documents. He stammered and left. That afternoon, Min found a salt sack left outside the gate. Inside were cloudy white grains that did not fully dissolve in water. Mrs. Sao smelled it and her face changed. "This is for salting low-grade fish, not for food sold in sealed jars." I had no proof of who sent it, but that night I installed another camera. Min lent us an old set from his repair shop. He climbed the pole, tightening screws as he said, "When we were small, you were the most afraid of ghosts in the hamlet. Now, watching you deal with living people, ghosts seem almost cute." I held the ladder below. "Ghosts do not make fake papers." He laughed. "Nor do they post vague accusations online." I was about to answer when my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number read, "If you want peace, stop. Large orders are not for people who do not know their place." I showed it to Min. He frowned. "Report it? Not enough yet. Save it first." I had learned something in the city. In a dispute, emotion makes you want to strike back immediately, but evidence is what prevents the other side from running away. I saved the message, took screenshots, and wrote down the time. On the workshop wall, the progress board still had 15 unfinished items. I did not have the luxury of being afraid for long. That night, after everyone had gone home, I checked the starter batch with Mrs. Sao. The smell of fermented fish was mild, not harsh. She dipped the tip of a bamboo chopstick, touched it to her tongue, and closed her eyes. "Good, it is alive now." "Fish sauce is alive too, Grandma?" "Of course. If the maker is careless, it dies in the smell. If the maker is impatient, it turns sharp. If the maker knows how to wait, sweetness comes at the end." I looked at the rows of clay jars under the yellow light. Perhaps a human life was like that too. There are days when we are thrown into darkness, mixed with salt and sealed in silence. But if the inside remains clean, time does not only spoil us, it can also mature us.
Chapter 7. The First Rain on the Old Workshop. On the 18th day, heavy rain arrived. Rain in the Mekong Delta does not knock. It pours down as if someone has overturned a river onto the roof. We were test packing the first 100 jars when water overflowed from the rear trench. Min and Hugh ran to stack sandbags. Hyung lifted boxes of lids onto a high table. I pulled the plastic curtains around the filling area and kept reminding everyone not to let dirty water into the clean zone. In the middle of the confusion, the power went out. The dryer stopped. Darkness fell, leaving only the rain and our quick breathing. Hyung's daughter cried loudly. I switched on my phone's flashlight. The small beam shook across faces wet with sweat. "Stay calm," I said, though my own voice trembled. "Protect the sterilized jars first. Move the batch waiting for filling into the inner room. Auntie Man, check the trench. Min, can the generator still run?" Min shook his head. "It is old. Yesterday it would not start." I closed my eyes for 1 second. If the drying area's temperature failed to remain stable, the semi-finished batch could be ruined. We did not have enough materials to remake everything. 45 days sounded long, but in food production, every day was a link in a chain. Break one link and the whole chain falls. Suddenly, Mrs. Sao stood in the middle of the workshop, leaning on her cane. Before there was electricity, we dried with rice husk charcoal. Min, run to Auntie Mai's bakery and borrow the large charcoal stove. Hyung, get bamboo racks. Van, call the inspection engineer and ask how to record an alternative drying procedure correctly. I looked at her. In chaos, old experience was an anchor. I called An Mok's engineer at once. He instructed me to write an incident record, measure temperature with a separate thermometer, isolate the affected batch, and never mix it with the clean batch. I followed each step. The rain still hammered the roof, but the workshop was no longer as scattered as an ant nest broken open. Min returned with the charcoal stove, soaked through. Hugh and Auntie Mon took turns fanning. Mrs. Sao sat watching the temperature, her eyes fixed on the needle. Hyung soothed her daughter with one hand while labeling the test batch with the other. No one complained. No one asked why we had to suffer this way when we could be home sleeping. Perhaps each person understood if this batch survived, we were not only saving product, we were proving that this small group would not be knocked down easily. Near midnight, the power returned. The water withdrew. We sat down on the floor, too tired to laugh aloud. I opened the incident record and asked everyone to sign as witnesses. Min looked at the paper and shook his head. You are haunted by paperwork. Paperwork saves us when other people tell the story wrong. He was silent for a moment, then nodded. When your father died, if there had been more papers, maybe the jar shed matter would not have disappeared like that.
I looked at him. Min rarely mentioned the old story. The year my father's storage shed was smashed, Min was the first to run over and help clear the broken pieces. We were 17 then. He wanted to report it, but my father stopped him. He said he did not want the village to become more troubled. Later, I often wondered whether that restraint had been forgiveness or exhaustion. Now I knew. If wrongdoing is not recorded, time turns it to rumor, then into a story no one remembers clearly, then into something that supposedly never happened. The next morning, An Mok sent an engineer down to inspect. The batch affected by the incident was separated and excluded from the test sample. The remaining batches met hygiene conditions. The young engineer, Kai, looked through the logbook and said, "Your records are more careful than many large facilities." I smiled tiredly, because we do not have the right to make mistakes. He looked at the women wiping the shelves again. Everyone has the right to make mistakes. The question is whether mistakes are recorded, corrected, or hidden. That sentence followed me all day. In the afternoon, when checking the camera footage, Min found that about 10 minutes before the power cut, someone had been wandering near the rear electric pole. The image was blurred, but the figure wore a gray raincoat and rode a motorbike with a Dongbin plate. The face was not visible. The person stopped, bent near the auxiliary electric box, then left. Soon afterward, the power failed. Min struck the table with his palm. They really interfered. I saved the file in 3 copies, one for Miss Ha, one for Auntie Mai, and one on my own hard drive. Not enough to conclude, but enough to know we cannot be careless from now on. Nhu stood beside us, pale. The plate looks like Brother Kwang's motorbike, the one from Uncle Tu's storage. I looked at her. Are you sure? I am not sure, but my house is near the cooperative warehouse. I have seen that bike many times. I did not pressure her to testify. I only wrote her statement in the internal notebook and left the confirmation line blank. Evidence must be as clean as the product. If I used guesswork to strike another person, I would become like them. That evening, the rain stopped. On the newly patched roof, the last drops fell one by one. I stood at the workshop door, breathing the smell of wet soil and ripening fish sauce. The first rain had not washed us away. It had only washed away the illusion that this road would be easy.
Chapter 8. The Countercomplaint. 1 week before the midterm inspection deadline, we received a summons from the District Economic Office. The subject? Verification of a complaint accusing An Van facility of using Dongbin's traditional formula without permission, enticing laborers away, dividing the community, and showing signs of unfair competition. The complaint was signed by Dongbin Cooperative. The writer, I guessed, was Lei Nguyen. Her style was clean and rounded, like a glass with bitter medicine stirred inside. In the complaint, I became a thief of the village formula, someone who exploited an old woman's trust, lured women away from work, and ruined the $12 billion contract. They even attached a photo of me leaving the village on the motor cart, captioned, "Transporting starter jars out of the locality without authorization." Mrs. Sao finished reading and struck her cane on the floor. "Those jars belong to my house. I have lived 70 years and only now learned that a clay jar needs a household registration." Huang was worried. "What if the district orders the workshop to stop, sister?" "No one stops a workshop because of one complaint alone, but we must prepare the file." I spent the whole night arranging documents, Mrs. Tsow's journals, invoices for jars, the warehouse rental agreement, the receipt for business registration, photos of every stage of production, payroll lists, the old memorandum with An Mok, and Ms. Ha's email confirming that signing was cancelled because of the representation dispute. I also printed a comparison table of the formula. The traditional method was the foundation, but the reduced salt process, sterilization, filling, and testing were improvements that I had prepared. I did not deny Dongbin's origin. I only objected to a few people claiming ownership over everyone's sweat. The working session took place in a small district meeting room. Uncle Tu, Lei Nguyen, Kwang, the warehouse keeper, and 2 households from the new list sat on one side. I came with Mrs. Tsao, Huang, and Auntie Mai, the warehouse owner. Min wanted to come, but I told him to stay and watch the workshop. The presiding officer was Mr. Dui, deputy head of the economic office, about 40 years old, concise in speech. Both sides will present based on documents, no personal attacks. Uncle Tu began in his familiar voice, sorrowful, generous, wounded. He said I had been raised by the village, but turned my back on it. He said the fish sauce formula was common property and could not be taken away to establish a private facility. Lei Nguyen projected photos, charts, and social media posts. She concluded, if anyone can use the word improvement to take customers, traditional products will be privatized. When it was my turn, I did not speak much. I handed over each file. I do not claim ownership of the traditional formula. I claim responsibility for the improved file and the process I created. Here is the sample batch journal with household signatures. Here is the original list that was later changed. Here is the buyer's email refusing to sign because of the representation dispute. Here is An Van's payroll where no one works unpaid. Here are the voluntary commitments of each current worker. Mr. Dui turned the pages for a long time. Uncle Tu began to lose patience. Anyone can make papers. What matters is principle. Mrs. Tsao laughed. Your principle is crossing out the name of the person who fermented the sauce, then asking that person to be grateful? Mr. Dui reminded her, please avoid personal attacks.
Mrs. Tsao sat straight. I am talking about the matter, not the person. The starter jars are mine. I brought them myself. If anyone says I was enticed, please provide evidence that I no longer have legal capacity. The room went quiet. I almost laughed, but held it in. Mrs. Tsao had not studied law, but she understood the right to decide for herself. Lei Nguyen changed direction. Even so, Sister Van is using Dongbin's name to deal with An Mok. I replied, no, the facility is named An Van, located in Tan Lok, and the label does not say Dongbin. If in the future I use a geographical indication or community brand, I will apply under the regulations. At present, I sell products made by my own group. Mr. Dui asked Uncle Tu, has Dongbin Cooperative registered a trademark or usage regulation for a shared formula? Uncle Tu stalled. We are working on it. Do you have documents already? Not yet. Mr. Dui wrote into the minutes. For now, there is no basis to conclude that An Van infringes a trademark. The contract dispute with An Mok is a civil relation among the parties. The Economic Office recommends that both sides refrain from using misleading information that affects production. The session did not end as Uncle Tu wanted. No one penalized me. No one stopped the workshop. But in the corridor, Lei Nguyen stepped close enough for only me to hear. You won one session, that is all. If the trial batch fails, all your papers become trash. I looked at her. Nguyen, you are intelligent. Do not keep using intelligence to cover what is wrong for other people. She gave a cold smile. You always think you are right. Do you know the whole village lost face because of you? No, the village lost face because of lies. She turned away. I watched her go without satisfaction. Nguyen was not born cruel. She grew up in a place that taught young people that if they wanted a position, they had to stand beside power, even when power was stepping on someone. Perhaps she believed that if Uncle Tu won, she would win too. She did not yet understand that victory on another person's back is the kind that makes you smaller and smaller. When I returned to the workshop, everyone was waiting. Nu asked first, "Did they stop us, sister?" I shook my head. Relief spread like wind. Mrs. Tsao hung her cane on the wall and said, "Then keep working. Fish sauce does not mature by talking." We laughed. Then everyone returned to their tasks. Outside, the counter-complaint had lost its force. Inside, 5,000 trial jars still waited for us to prove ourselves with something no one could argue against: quality.
Chapter 9. Inspection Day. The day of the trial batch inspection arrived with clear sunlight after many rainy days. We were at the workshop by 5 in the morning. Hung wiped every shelf again. Nhu checked the traceability labels. Auntie Mon randomly weighed boxes. Mrs. Sao sat beside the row of clay jars, rolling wooden prayer beads through her fingers, watching the batch as if it were a grandchild about to take an exam. I held a file so thick my hands ached, yet still feared some paper might be missing. A small workshop could not expect to be trusted by reputation. We had to make every number, every signature, every batch code speak for us. The En Mok team arrived at 8. Miss Ha came with Mr. Fan Trong, Engineer Kai, and a supplier audit specialist. They did not smile much, but they did not create unreasonable difficulties either. That both reassured and unsettled me. Goodwill might make people listen to a presentation, but only process made them order long-term. They inspected the washing area, fermentation area, filling area, fish source, salt lot codes, drying temperature, payroll board, and incident report from the power loss rainstorm. When the specialist scanned a code on a jar lid, the screen showed the date the fish was received, the packer, the quick test result, and the lot status. He looked at me. For a small facility, keeping records this detailed takes a lot of work. I answered, more work at the beginning means fewer arguments later. By noon, the delegation met privately. The whole workshop waited outside, and no one could eat the lunchboxes that had gone cold. I heard the ceiling fan clicking, and even the sound of Nhu swallowing. Min ran over from his repair shop carrying a bag of sugarcane juice, tried to joke, and made no one laugh. When the door opened, Mr. Fan Trong came out holding the minutes. I stood up so quickly that my chair struck the wall. The trial batch qualifies for independent testing and pilot sale in 10 stores, he said. However, current opacity is not sufficient for the annual contract. En Mok proposes Phase 1, 3 months, 5,000 jars per month. If production remains stable, we will increase gradually. I heard the word qualifies and needed several seconds to understand it. Hung burst into tears. Nhu covered her mouth. Mrs. Sao tapped her cane on the floor 3 times, like stamping approval. I signed the minutes with the fountain pen my father had left me. The ink smudged slightly on the word Van, but I did not wipe it. A true signature does not need to be perfect. It only needs to belong to someone willing to be responsible. Our joy did not last through the afternoon before another wave arrived. Miss Ha showed me an anonymous email accusing Van An of using substandard salt with a photo of the suspicious salt sack once left in front of the workshop. That day, if we had not written minutes, kept samples, and reported internally to En Mok, the photo might have been enough to suspend the trial batch. This time, the file saved us. Miss Ha said, "Van, we trust the process, but someone is trying to interfere. You need to protect the workshop more seriously." I nodded. That evening, we installed more cameras at the auxiliary storage and rear gate. Min tightened screws while saying, "When we were little, you were the most afraid of ghosts in the hamlet. Now that I see you deal with living people, ghosts seem almost friendly." I smiled. Ghosts do not file complaints.
On the night of the first delivery, En Mok's refrigerated truck was stopped at Tonfu Bridge because someone reported that it was carrying goods of unclear origin. I brought all permits, test certificates, and the contract out to present. The inspection team allowed the truck to continue, but followed us back to the workshop for a physical check. Just as we reached the gate, the camera alerted movement at the rear storage. Nhu ran out, her face pale. "Someone is prying the door." Min rushed after a figure in a raincoat jumping over the fence, but the road was dark and slippery, and the person sped away on a motorbike. In the storage room, we found a black plastic bag containing 3 unlabeled bottles of additive and a stack of misprinted En Van labels. I did not touch it. I invited the inspection team to witness, wrote minutes on the spot, extracted the camera footage, and sealed the items. A young officer looked at me differently now. "If you had discovered this after we checked, the matter would have been complicated." "I know," I said. "That is why I need everything recorded in front of you." Min returned, breathless. He said the runaway motorbike's last 2 plate numbers resembled Kwang's, the warehouse keeper for Uncle Tu. I did not conclude anything. I only wrote into the minutes that the witness was not certain of the person's identity. Evidence had to be clean as the product. If I used suspicion to strike at someone, I would be like them. At 2 in the morning, the refrigerated truck left with all goods aboard. We stood watching its taillights disappear down the road. No one cheered. Nhu sank onto the floor and cried. "Why can they be like this, sister? They are only jars of fish sauce." I sat beside her. "No, to them, this is the power to decide who is allowed to lift their head." Mrs. Sao put a hand on Nu's shoulder. Cry now. Tomorrow, wash your face and keep working. The next morning, I sent all camera footage, inspection minutes, and photos of the plastic bag to Miss Ha, the economic office, and the commune police. This time, I did not only keep evidence, I filed a request to verify interference with production. When I signed the request, my hand did not tremble. I had given them chances to stop. If they still chose to step across the line, what remained was no longer a village neighbor matter. It was law.
Chapter 10. The Season When the Water Withdraws. The mediation session was held in the Dongbin commune office after the police invited Kwong in for questioning. The workshop camera had not captured a clear face, but a residence camera on the road behind the storage area had recorded the motorbike. At first, Kwong said he had only passed by. Then, he said a stranger had hired him to carry something. In the end, he fell silent when the officer presented transfer messages from Lei Quen's account. The incident had not caused actual loss, so it did not grow into a major case, but it was enough for minutes, administrative penalties, and written commitments that the parties would not continue obstructing production. I walked into the commune meeting room with a strange feeling. This was the same place where my father had once had to explain himself for reporting that people were adding color to fish sauce. Back then, no one apologized to him. Today, I was not sure I would receive an apology either, but at least the truth was no longer sitting alone. Uncle Tu Lei was present, looking much older. Lei Quen sat beside him, eyes swollen. Kwong bowed his head. On my side were Mrs. Sao, Min, Hung, a representative from the economic office, and my mother. My mother had not told me she would come. She simply sat quietly in the back row, spine straight. The commune chairman opened with an appeal for unity. Hearing those two words, I felt a sourness inside. In small places, unity is often used to advise the injured person to be silent first, because the person causing harm is harder to advise. When my turn came, I did not tell a story of suffering. I read 4 requests. Dongbin Cooperative must remove misleading information about An Van. It must not use my files, images, or improved process without an agreement. It must publicly apologize to households whose names were erased, and it must reimburse direct costs arising from the interference on delivery night. Uncle Tu gave a pale smile. You ask for too much. After all, we are from the same village. My mother suddenly spoke. When you warned the district market not to let me sell, did you remember we were from the same village? The room fell completely silent. I turned to look at her. She rarely confronted anyone, but that day she continued. I do not want my child to live in hatred, but I also do not want her to keep yielding so that others can call her well-behaved. Lei Quen began to cry. She said she was afraid I would take all of Dongbin's opportunities, afraid that if the contract was not held by the cooperative, she would remain a shadow forever. I looked at her and recognized, behind all that sharpness, a very young fear. Fear of having no place, so she clung to someone with power. I did not hug her, and I did not scold her. I only said, opportunity is not used up when it is divided correctly. You need to apologize first to the people whose names you erased, not only to me. Mrs. Sao stood with her cane. I am old. I do not need an apology that sounds pleasant. I need written confirmation that my household has the right to make fish sauce, sell fish sauce, and contribute work wherever I choose. The commune chairman asked the secretary to record it. After many hours, the mediation minutes were completed. Dongbin had to post a correction, reimburse part of the costs, and not obstruct households from making lawful transactions. Kwong received a separate penalty. Lei Quen signed a commitment not to spread false information. Uncle Tu signed last, his strokes so forceful they nearly tore the paper. 3 months later, the first phase of the contract stabilized, and An Mok increased the order to 10,000 jars per month and proposed developing steamed fish paste in sealed containers. This time, I did not decide alone. We held a full group meeting. From 6 people at the beginning, An Van now had 27 regular workers and 11 raw material supplier households. Half came from Dongbin. Some had once been silent. Some had once stood on the wrong side. I did not bring up old matters when they came to work. I only required everyone to sign one set of rules: wages clear, profits clear, incidents recorded, and no one allowed to turn the word community into a curtain hiding greed. At the end of the year, the second contract was signed. There were no fake chrysanthemums on the table, no inflated banner, only 2 printed copies of the contract, a pot of hot tea, and the people who directly did the work sitting at the same table. Before signing, I handed the pen to Mrs. Sao. She startled. What am I signing? I answered, you sign as traditional process advisor. Without you, we would not dare develop the new product. Her handwriting trembled and the ink was uneven, but when she finished signing, the whole room applauded. She turned her face away to wipe her eyes and muttered, so showy. I smiled. Some things look showy, but are in truth a way of returning color to someone who has spent a life being treated as background gray. 1 year after I left Dong Bin on the 3-wheeled cart, flood season returned. Water rose to the edge of the workshop yard, but did not enter because we had built a barrier. The metal roof no longer leaked. The new dryer ran steadily. New taught newcomers how to scan batch codes. Hong became packing team leader. Mrs. Sao came to the workshop only 3 days a week now, but whenever she arrived, everyone automatically cleared the way as if welcoming a strict expert. Dong Bin also began to rebuild. The cooperative sent a letter asking An Van to support basic hygiene process training. I read the letter for a long time. My mother only said, help the craft, do not help them forget the mistake. So we opened free classes for small households, including those from Dong Bin, but everyone had to sign commitments not to use the An Van name for sales, not to spread false information, and not to pressure anyone into sides. Conditional forgiveness is not pettiness, it is a fence that prevents kindness from becoming a road for others to return and step on us again. The first training session took place at the Dong Bin Cultural House, the place where a banner once hung without my name. This time, the board only read clean production process training for small households. No name of mine, no name of Uncle Tu, no grand slogan. Uncle Ba Kung sat in the first row taking notes. A few people who had once scolded me avoided my eyes and quietly asked how to make a batch log. I answered the way I would answer any trainee, not cold, not intimate. Sometimes fairness does not need embraces, it only needs not to be biased, even when one finally has the power to be biased.
In the late afternoon, I went to the fish wharf. Floodwater covered the stone steps and reflected gray clouds. A year earlier, I had thought I had lost the village. Now I understood. There are places one must leave in order to return in a different posture, not as a child begging to be recognized, not as a betrayer needing forgiveness, but simply as a person of the craft carrying contracts, papers, the smell of fish sauce, and the names once crossed out and now written again. Mrs. Sao appeared beside me. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking that every year the water rises and every year it withdraws. She nodded. Yes, but the family that builds its foundation higher has less mud to clean. I laughed. She always pulled philosophy back to house foundations, clay jars, and hands. But she was right. The flood inside people is the same. We cannot stop it from rising. We can only build a higher foundation, from principles, evidence, honest labor, and people willing to stand beside one another when the communal yard is full of harsh voices. That night, I locked the workshop. On my desk, the second contract lay beside my father's fountain pen. I opened the last page and looked at the signatures. Mine, Mrs. Sao's, Hung's, News. Many strokes, many hands. No one had been pushed down into a line saying, voluntary, without profit. Outside, the water season still rose, but in the brightly lit workshop, I no longer feared being swept away as before. I had learned that one person cannot hold back an entire river, but one person can keep one name from being erased. From that name, others learn to keep their own, and when enough names stand together, even the largest current must divide and find another path. A few days later, I hung a small sign in front of the workshop. Whoever makes the product has his name in the product record. The sentence sounded so simple that even children could understand it, yet we adults had gone a long circle before admitting it. Children from the neighborhood ran in to look at the scanning machine and asked why one jar of fish sauce needed so many signatures. New bent down and explained that each signature was a person accepting responsibility, and when everyone accepted responsibility for their own part, no one could easily take another person's work. I stood by the door and watched Hung's daughter point to her mother's name on the assignment board, smiling with such pride. Perhaps that was what I had wanted to protect most all. Not a large contract, not a beautiful brand, but the moment when a child saw her mother's labor called by its proper name. I also knew the road ahead would not be perfectly smooth. There would still be defective batches, returned goods, shortages of capital, jealous people, abnormal rains, and meetings so tiring that one wanted to quit. But now we had a way through them. No one could secretly change the list in the dark anymore. No one could ask women to do the main work, but sign only as helpers. No one could use village affection to demand silence before a wrong. If one day An Van grows larger, I hope it still remembers the nights when the workshop leaked, the salt sacks left at the gate, Mrs. Tsow's cane striking the floor, and the first smudged signature I wrote. People easily forget why they began once money arrives. That is why I placed the first contract in a glass frame in the meeting room. Not to boast, but to remind us, a name written on paper only has meaning when the person behind that name does not betray the hands that lifted her up.
Hey there! If you enjoy our audio content, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Most importantly, click subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated with everything Zuzu Audio. Support the channel and join our community today.